Hi everyone. So in this video, we will be looking at all the bones that are visible when in the superior view of skull. So we already mentioned that the skull is the bony structure that is present in the head region. Now why are we seeing about all the bones that are present in skull and all of its parts? Because that will make reading the rest of the topics, okay, reading the relations or the attachment of muscle, origin and insertion much more easier. You'll be familiar with all the parts, okay, when you go into individual topics. Okay, for example, muscles of facial expressions. There are a lot of muscles, okay, to understand where it originates and inserts, and similarly lot of other glands and extra, all of those. Okay, you have to know the bony parts. Okay, so the skull is made up of a number of bones. So we are looking at the skull from different angle. When viewed from the front, what are all the bones are visible? That is called as Norma frontalis. Similarly, when looked from side, okay, what are all the bones and what parts of the bones are visible? That is called as Norma lateralis. Okay, when looked from above, okay, that is called as Norma verticalis. Okay, so what are all the bones seen in Norma verticalis? This is the easiest of them all. Okay, the first bone that is seen here is the frontal bone. Okay, the squamous part of the frontal bone. That's the first bone seen. Followed by that, we have two bones, one on either side. That is called as the parietal bone. Now, I already mentioned that the parietal bone has four borders and four angles. So, here you can see anterior border, posterior border as well as the medial border. Okay, the lower border you are not able to see here. Okay, you can see the anterior, posterior and the medial border. The lateral border is not visible in this view. Okay, and the two angles that are visible is antero-superior angle and postero-superior angle. These are the two angles of parietal bone that's visible. And I told you there is a foramen in the parietal bone. Okay, so this is the parietal foramen. And these are all the parts that are visible in the parietal bone. So in Norma verticalis, we've seen the frontal bone as well as the parietal bone. What's the next bone that we are seeing? That is called as the occipital bone. Now I already told you that occipital is the posterior most bone that is present in the skull. So this is the occipital bone. Okay. In addition to this, you should be familiar with the sutures and landmarks. I already told you that the frontal and parietal bone joins here at this junction, no, by a suture that is called as the coronal suture. Okay, the frontal and parietal bone joins here by the coronal suture, and then both the parietal bones, okay, both the parietal bones will join in the midline, okay, along here. That is called as the sagittal suture. Okay, first one was the coronal suture. So any section taken in this direction is called as the coronal plane, right? So that is named after this suture. So that is the coronal suture. Similarly, section like this that splits into right and left, that is called as sagittal plane. Okay, that is derived from the word sagittal suture. Okay, and the next one is the lambdoid suture that is formed between the parietal and occipital bone. So this is the lambdoid suture. It resembles lambda. Okay. So this is the lambdoid suture and it resembles lambda. This is the lambda symbol, no? It resembles that. Okay. Now regarding the landmarks, the place where the coronal suture meets the sagittal suture. Okay. This junction is called as bregma. The place where the coronal suture joins the sagittal suture. Okay, that point in the midline is called as bregma. In the fetus, okay, that will form a gap in that region. That is called as anterior fontanelle. Okay, so in the fetus, this bregma region will not be, the bones will not be fused. Okay, it is yet to be in the developing phase. So that forms the anterior fontanelle. Similarly, the place where the sagittal suture meets the lambdoid suture, this junction marked by X, that is called as lambda. Okay, so we saw bregma and lambda. And I already mentioned what oblion is. That is the point between the two parietal foramens. So this is oblion. So in this is bregma, this is oblion, and this one here is lambda. Okay, so that's about the sutures and landmarks visible in this view. So let's do a quick recap of all the bones that are seen in the Norma verticalis. We have the frontal bone, followed by that we have the parietal bone, and then the occipital bones. It's very, very simple. And then there is coronal suture. Okay, we have the sagittal suture and lambdoid suture. Followed by that there is bregma, obelion and lambda. Okay, so these are all the details that is seen from the superior view of skull, or it is also called as Norma verticalis. Hi everyone. So we've been trying to look at the skull from different angles in an attempt to making it easier to understand each of the bones that is present in the skull. Okay, we've already discussed the Norma frontalis, which is the anterior view of skull, Norma lateralis, okay, that is the lateral view of skull, and Norma verticalis, that is the superior view of skull. Okay, this is the next angle by which we are looking at the skull. This is all in an attempt so that you will know where each bone is placed in the skull and what are the parts present in each bone. Okay, so in the posterior view, okay, what are all the bones that are visible and what part of the bones are visible in the view. So first, the bone visible here is the parietal bone. Okay, this is the parietal bone. The next bone that is visible in the posterior view is the occipital bone. Now this is the posterior most bone present in the skull. Okay, frontal, parietal and occipital. Okay, so that's the next bone. So what are parts of occipital bone are visible in this view? First we had the squamous part or the flat part of the occipital bone. Then we'll have a protuberance, a bulge in the midline, that is called as the external occipital protuberance. Okay, the bulge is called as external occipital protuberance. Now extending from this protuberance, there is a crest going downwards. Okay, what is a crest? A elevated line. Okay, the crest is called as external occipital crest. Okay, the bulge is called as external occipital protuberance and the crest going downwards is called as external occipital crest. Okay, and extending from the external occipital protuberance on either side, there are two pairs of lines. Okay, you can see them here in the image. This is one pair and below that is the second pair. Okay, 1 and 2. They are called as the highest nuchal line and superior nuchal line. So that extends outward from the external occipital protuberance. That is the highest and superior nuchal lines. So this is the highest nuchal line. Okay, and the next one here is the superior nuchal line. And extending midway of the external occipital crest. Okay, this is the midpoint of the external occipital crest. Okay, from there laterally another pair of line will emerge, that is called as the inferior nuchal line. You can observe that there is nice gap present between the superior and inferior nuchal line. Similarly, below the inferior nuchal line also there is space. Okay, so these are all the parts of occipital bone that are visible in Norma occipitalis or posterior view of skull. What is the next bone? That is the temporal bone. You are seeing a process of temporal bone here. Okay, this is not sharp. So what process could this be? This is the mastoid process of temporal bone. Okay, so we can see the temporal bone. To be specific, we can see the mastoid process and this is the mastoid part of temporal bone. I told you there is a junction here that resembles lambda, right? The symbol lambda. So this is that junction. Okay, so that is the place where the sagittal suture meets the lambdoid suture. And I also told you that there may be accessory bones present in the lambdoid suture. In this image, it's not there. If it is present like here or here, that is called as the Vermian bone, okay, or sutural bones. So this is about Norma occipitalis. Now let's take a look at all the bones that are visible here. Okay, let's do a quick recap. So what were all the bones? First we saw the parietal bone. Here we are seeing the, which angle of parietal bone is this? This is the postero-inferior angle and this is the postero-superior angle of parietal bone and this is the posterior border of parietal bone. Okay. And then we saw the occipital bone, its various parts, okay, as well as the temporal bone. Okay, what is this junction called as? Where the point where the postero-inferior angle of parietal bone will meet the occipital and temporal bone. That junction is called as the asterion. Okay, asterion. So this is everything about the Norma occipitalis or posterior view of skull.